Hello, I'm Dr. Keith Martin, the Executive Director of the Consortium of Universities for Global Health, and welcome to CUGH's series of Global Health Leaders. The World Bank is a primary source of revenue policy analysis and advice for countries who are in poverty. A goal to reduce and eliminate extreme poverty around the world is at the heart of the World Bank's activities. But core to that, of course, is improving health outcomes. And we're very lucky today to have the global director of the World Bank's Health, Nutrition, and Population Global Practice, Dr. Juan Pablo Uribe. Dr. Uribe has truly had a fascinating career. His career at the top levels of the private sector, public sector, and at the bank provide an unusual and extraordinary insight into the challenges the world faces in addressing health challenges and improving access to quality healthcare for all. As an aside, Dr. Uribe was also Colombia's Minister of Health, so it's a really amazing place to have been and provides extraordinary insights. And so it's a great honor to welcome you, Dr. Uribe, to our Global Health Leader interview. Thank you very much for being here.
Hey, thanks so much to you and to the consortium. My appreciation for this space and looking forward to the conversation, and extremely, extremely happy to see the universities, the academic world, fully engaged with the global health challenges.
Well, thank you so much. And I have to ask you, people go into international development, but you've had such an extraordinary career across different sectors. If I may ask, what compelled you to get into this space?
Okay, I've had three passions in my life. One was soccer, and I moved out of it as I learned that I was not so good, and I got older. The second one is, of course, my wife, Carolina, and I have not walked out of that one, by the way. And the third one, which is still with me as well, is health. I've dedicated my life and my professional effort to health, and it's been all over the place, if I could say, because I love everything about health, from individual healthcare, from the expectations of a mother who's going to give birth, or the difficulties of somebody with a terminal condition, all the way up to the policy design in our health systems. And more recently, also to the global aspects of public health, which are so important. And basically, what I've tried to do, Keith, is to learn as much as I can at all of those levels. Again, from the very micro healthcare delivery aspects, which are beautiful and challenging, individual and local, to the most complex as well public health challenges that we're facing in the globe, but also in our regions and our countries. And that has basically defined my professional efforts and what I'm doing right now at the World Bank.
And as a former Minister of Health and as a physician, you really occupy an extraordinary vision. As somebody, if you could share with us, as a former Minister of Health, what are some of the challenges you see your colleagues as ministers facing today in a post-COVID environment?
Wow, it's an excellent question, by the way. I would say that the first challenge that we and ministers of health are facing around the world is maintaining the attention on the health sector and on the need to further invest in health systems. COVID was an extraordinary window where everybody, heads of states, parents and teachers, everybody were looking at health. Health became the center of our life, and it also became the center of public investments and also of private sector efforts. Now that the pandemic has stayed hopefully behind us, most governments, most ministers of finance, and even many people in their day-to-day lives are shifting away from the interest in the health sector and in health systems. I think that ministers of health are struggling in maintaining that interest. And it's a very important message that jointly we should try to maintain on the agenda. We still need, even more than before COVID, to further invest in stronger health systems that will be able to address the needs of our societies.
And I was at a meeting last year in New York, and the Minister of Health from Singapore was there, and he said something. He's an economist. He said something I think very impressive. He said, "Look, as an economist, but as a health minister, I can tell you that unless we get the non-communicable diseases and invest in public health, we're not going to be able to deliver the outcomes we need, and we're going to have a crushing blow to our financial systems. What is, what is the what is the advice that you can give to our listeners in the value proposition to be able to convey to them what you said, that the growth of NCDs is going to be put an almost unsustainable weight on financial systems in countries, particularly in LMICs. What is the block in terms of getting that message across, and how do we overcome it, do you think?
Let me go back to a report that we just recently launched together with the World Health Organization. Every 2 years, we do a global monitoring report that looks basically at universal health coverage and how we're progressing with it. And what we saw is that since 2015, even before COVID came, we have stagnated in progress in both access to essential services, where almost half of the world population does not have that access secured, as well as on the financial protection that we all need when accessing services. And it's so important. And we're, by the way, pushing more people into poverty when they need healthcare. So we're backtracking. That's the first element I want to bring into the answer, because it provides a baseline, which is a very worrisome one. Second argument is that health, well-being are fundamental since the beginning of our life, all the way to the elder and the aging, for not only the quality of our life, but also the productivity that we can bring to societies, to the building of human capital, by the way, for our capacity to engage with others, and again, bring more well-being to our households, our communities, and our countries. And again, if we're missing on that human capital accumulation, if we're missing basically in the capacity to improve health outcomes, again, throughout the life cycle, we're going to be missing huge economic opportunities as well for development. And I think that argument is also an argument that needs to be present in the day-to-day discussions. I think the minister is completely right. And again, this is a moment where we cannot turn the back to health investments and to health system strengthening. On the contrary, I think we all need to push harder for efficient and larger, I would say, allocation of resources in health systems and in the health determinants, which again are behind those health outcomes.
And I think that's an important point that your global practice is driving forward, is to address health, but also the social determinants of health. But it is a challenge for ministers of health at the cabinet table, perhaps, to be able to assert that when the power resides with the ministers of finance and maybe those in the president's office or prime minister's office. Now, our attendees, more than 40,000, or our network around the world, would like to be able to assert this more strongly to their governments. Can you, as a former Minister of Health, having sat and struggled with this yourself, as every Minister of Health does, what advice can you give to them in terms of strategizing with their governments, in terms of engaging, connecting academia with governments, which I think is a missing opportunity?
Let me start with the multi-sectoral work that is needed in trying to address those health determinants. It's always very difficult. Let me bring a concrete example that we're working a lot from the bank side with many other global partners, and I'm sure that you're very interested in it. It's on pandemic preparedness and prevention, and it's the One Health approach. We know perfectly, in terms of knowledge, in terms of research, the interconnection between animal sciences and many elements on the agriculture, let's say, world, and human health. And these connections present some of the biggest growing risks in terms of future pandemics because of climate change, because of deforestation, because of migration, etc. And regardless of our knowledge, which is there, our capacity to execute together becomes extremely compromised and weak when we go down to regions, to governments, and to subnational governments, because the institutions are misaligned. The budgets are misaligned, and as you very well said, Keith, the same accountability and leadership is misaligned. I would say we need to really try to bring together the leadership, and then look at the more structural elements of institutions and budgets. But if the leadership does not come together in the same conversation, One Health will always be a desire and not a reality. Only sitting together, those ministers, only sitting together inside the bank, the colleagues who are leading agriculture and health and water and sanitation will enable these multi-sectorial interventions to become a reality and be effective. So I want to emphasize that. And again, try to show something where I think the academia has a great space to keep on filling. And it's how to connect the evidence, the knowledge, and our learning with our actions and the implementation of changes on the ground. There seems to persist a gap, no, between this. And again, One Health is a very good example, but I could go, for example, to nutrition and the difficulties in nutrition to really bring all what we know in terms of evidence and research, greatly driven by universities, to effective implementation on the ground where multiple sectors need to come together, not only health, not only agriculture, not only water, not only commerce, etc. So let's always think, and I think this is an important message for the consortium, and that implementation of knowledge and research at the local and national and regional levels, which is where we struggle a lot. By the way, the World Bank, that's exactly what you do in academia. We try to bring all the best evidence and knowledge. We try to learn across countries and regions, and then with technical assistance, bring that knowledge and those experiences into the application of financing mechanisms for countries to further improve and develop their health systems and their well-being and health status.
I'll get into the thanks, Juan Pablo, into the One Health issue and the climate, because you made a very important and significant shift in climate investments of late, and our folks would really like to hear about that. But if I could get back to what the bank does, a number of people might have misunderstandings of what the bank does, that they can just go in and ask for a loan. Can you just briefly just tell our listeners, how does the bank finance, in your case, you have 240 plus projects, how do you finance those projects? How do they get financed?
So let me start by saying that the World Bank is an institution that belongs to the countries. The shareholders, the directors that sit at the board of the World Bank are the countries themselves, represented through their ministers of finance, basically. The bank has a model that basically works through countries and through governments in countries. So the money that the bank and the instruments that the bank uses to support country development are always demanded by countries themselves and driven by countries themselves, by the governments. We do have an arm for the private sector, the International Financial Corporation, we call it the IFC, that works in stimulating investments and the growth of the private sector to be a part of the solution of these public challenges that our countries faces. But I want to emphasize that the bank is a mechanism that belongs to the governments and works through the governments, basically bringing, I would say, four things. One is knowledge, as we spoke. And again, our partnership with universities is extremely important for that around the world. The second is technical assistance, the capacity to work with government officials and leaders at the country level in the solution of their problems. The third one is partnerships, that many times people do not see, but it's extremely important because we have the capacity of conveying a lot of important actors, NGOs, civil society, universities, foundations, other governments around the solution of problems in the world. And finally, of course, the financing instruments. And in the financing instruments, we have different loans, which are very competitive and better than the market prices, let's say, for the middle-income countries. But we have what we call IDA, which are the resources, most of them concessional and grant money for the lower-income countries. These resources again, combined with partnerships, technical assistance, and knowledge, are an excellent support for countries and their leaders in addressing in all sectors, not only health, their development needs.
And I think people should know that the public institutions have access to an astonishing array of data and information that the bank puts out that people can access, not only country specific, but more generally, right?
Yes, and I'm very happy that you raised that. I think that's one of the public assets of the bank, because in all the sectors, we have great repositories of data. We have recurrent surveys that are being done, and we work with countries in a lot of their own, let's say, monitoring of social development and economic growth. And this data is always available for many others to work. In the coming months and years, I can dare to say that this will all be strengthened using, for example, artificial intelligence and stronger information systems. And it's one of the great products that we bring out there for everybody to use, data. And it's data that will enable us to identify with precision the gaps and the needs, and also the evidence in doing better interventions to resolve those.
I have to tell you, Juan Pablo, two of my favorite ones are number one, the country-specific partnership, where the countries put out their asks. They actually define what they want to develop in, so the world can actually see what the country's priorities are. Is extremely important. And then what some we may or may not be aware of is that you have an external evaluating mechanism that actually looks at what works and what doesn't work and what the bank does, right?
But we have an independent evaluation group, and
Yes.
it's fully independent. It's on an arm's length from the teams who are leading project implementation with the governments at the country and regional levels, and it does thorough independent evaluations of our operations, of our interventions. So by the way, so that we can know how much we're progressing with them and also learn in doing them better. And those evaluations are also public, which is extremely important. But in many of our spaces, we work hand in hand with civil society, with NGOs, who are bringing all their experience and capacity also locally and regionally to further improve the work that we and other multilateral institutions and bilateral governments are doing together with middle and low income countries around the world. And I think we need to preserve that capacity of learning from our own mistakes, recognizing mistakes as well, and as well be able to measure progress and success and share that in improving the situations around the world. By the way, most countries face the same challenges in the surface with very different local context deeper below. So it's a mix of the technical knowledge around the policy, but it's also this mystery, no, of the political economy in each one of our countries and how to really advance public policies to have better education, better water and sanitation, better healthcare, and financial protection for it.
And I think it's such an important point that there's no one size fits all, and a message for all of us to know that the political economy in each individual country and within countries is exceptionally important for actors to understand very clearly, and often difficult to understand. So the information that the bank puts out is invaluable for all of us to be able to learn from, which is fantastic. And if I could ask Juan Pablo, if you could share the priorities of your global practice with the audience, please.
And health, what we try to do is a long-term health system strengthening. We want strengthened health systems that are sustainable through time and can really achieve with resilience to shocks universal health coverage. That's our ambition. That's our purpose. For that, the bank has comparative advantages, I would say, in 5 core pillars that we have defined with clarity. These pillars are health financing, and this is the efficiency, the flows, the proper allocation of financial resources in our health systems. It's the healthcare delivery design with strong emphasis on community and primary healthcare, but going all the way up to hospital design and redesign and making sure that there's an integration in healthcare delivery around patient needs. The third area is nutrition. And here, Keith, we started with a lot of work in acute and chronic malnutrition in terms of stunting. But then we're seeing this increasing rates, as you mentioned at the beginning in NCDs, tied to obesity and overweight. So we're addressing both spectrums of malnutrition. The fourth area is pandemic preparedness, prevention, and response. And it comes from before COVID. It's not a COVID response. It's a permanent threat that we have, and we want to see systems with stronger public health functions, better surveillance systems, better capacity to surge when a pandemic explodes, and address it without stopping caring on the essential services. And the fifth one has to do with climate and health, that we need to stop there for a minute later on if we have time. Underlying those five pillars of health financing, healthcare delivery, nutrition, pandemics, and climate, we have some cross-cutting issues that we follow closely and work strongly on them. Digital in health as an accelerator of closing the inequity gaps behind these five pillars. Aging of the population and a careful understanding of those demographic trends that, as you also pointed out when you alluded to NCDs, will completely shift the burden of disease and also the financial costs of our systems. So that's basically what we do. And again, we try to do it looking on our sites to other sectors, to work integrated with them, looking outside of the bank to learn and work with other partners that have so much to contribute as well.
If I could do the last part, because you had a so significant change, Juan Pablo, and an important one in dealing with the climate crisis, which is actually, we know it's not one crisis, but you have the biodiversity crisis that's also an existential challenge that receives short shrift. Can you just share with the audience this fundamental and important change in lending that the bank is undergoing with regard to addressing climate change?
Yes. Let me illustrate this huge change, which should become, by the way, a priority for all of us at three levels. The first one is in the statement of the mission of the World Bank. The World Bank, for more than 70 years, has been focused on working at this national model, country by country. And now we've brought to our mission that always talked about ending poverty and improving prosperity, we added in a livable planet. Because if we don't address a challenge like climate, which is transboundary, it goes beyond a country, beyond a region, it impacts all of us, we won't have a livable planet. So the first one is the recognition at the highest level at the mission. The second one is a commitment that was expressed at the end of the year in COP28 in Dubai by Ajay Banga, our president, of having at least 45% of all the annual bank financing being tied to projects that are climate sensitive, that follow the Paris Agreement. All of them, by the way, all projects will be aligned with Paris Agreement, and at least 45% of our overall financing every year will be to climate sensitive projects in all of the different areas. And this brings me to the third dimension of the example of how seriously we take it. And it's our climate and health program in health, nutrition, and population. A climate and health program, Keith, that looks carefully at the intersection between climate and health systems, both on the mitigation side, where health systems have an important footprint, but for most on the adaptation side, where in low and middle income countries who don't have such a big footprint need the capacity to adapt to be more resilient to the climate shocks. And here we're trying to bring knowledge. This is something that we should be working together with universities, bring better capacity of understanding the local country needs in that adaptation to climate change, and then the effective solutions that hopefully we can help finance. Those are three very good examples on how climate change and know the consequences that it brings to human development and economic growth are impacting in our work program.
And I think you said so well, Juan Pablo. There's obviously a cost to action, but there's a cost to inaction, and that cost to inaction is vastly greater than the cost to action. There's ample proof support that. But a challenge for countries, and I would like to reflect on this, is how big a challenge is the capacity within the public service to be able to implement the knowledge we have to scale up the public programs that are necessary to deal with not only the health challenges that you so well described, but also the adaptation mitigation programs, initiatives that are necessary to deal with the climate biodiversity crisis.
I really appreciate that question, because many times, let's say that the immediate and easy response is to say what we need more is money. And we need to bring more funding and more development assistance to countries. And with that, we will resolve problems by itself. And we've learned better, by the way, because as you pointed out, Keith, with all the institutional capacity, and I would say the proper leadership and governance arrangements at the country level, those resources will not become effective solutions and effective sustainable solutions for the communities. And it's because of that another emphasis of our work on the day-to-day has to do with training and capacity building. We have a flagship course that we have implemented for the last 25 years, reaching out to thousands and thousands of public officials, of leaders, of academic leaders, of World Bank staff around the world, giving them more instruments, more capacity in leading in these needed changes. We have a joint learning network that brings together more than 30 countries in sharing their experiences directly so that their capacity experiences can go across regions into other countries. And that's why we also try to support very important institutional development efforts around, for example, national institutes of health, around the governing bodies in the health systems, around regional organizations like the Africa CDC that came recently in the continent to lead on so many important public health functions. We need stronger capacity, and it has to be always a focus of our work.
And that's the health system's flagship program, I believe. Is that correct?
That's the health flagship, the one of training.
Yeah, and they can get it online, right? They can actually go to the bank site and I think probably sign. Is that how they sign up for it?
Well, yeah, you got me on that one, by the way, but they can always write to me, by the way. You always can contact them. But we try to do two things with it. We try to do, let's say, global training courses. For example, on health financing, we're going to have one in April. It's an annual one, and everybody comes around health financing topics. But we also try to localize it to a specific country context. So in Ecuador, or in Japan, or in Nigeria, we try to take deep dives that take into account, again, the differences that lie behind the same problems, and which are so determinant of our capacity to make a difference, really being able to be country-specific or problem-specific.
I thought that was so valuable in seeing that, and I thought how fascinating and how important work that is for the bank to do, to be able to provide that training relevant to the country-specific context. That was fascinating. And in that, I've got just a few more questions, Juan Pablo, and I really appreciate your time. In the messaging to the academic community, to those institutions in countries where governments have those gaps in the public service, is there any, we at CUGH are trying to bridge that gap. Is there any advice that you can give for us in terms of messaging to the academic community and what they may choose to do to work with their governments to strengthen that internal capacity across ministries?
So I want to be very humble because you do such a fantastic work, Keith, that I need to keep on learning from all what you do, basically around the world. But I would emphasize two things that I've seen from my own perspective back in Colombia, for example, and I can also see them here in the bank. One is we need to insist, and the universities need to lead on this, on the importance of trying to always do evidence-based policies. And again, it's the academic world with a lot of practical hand-holding that can come to governments, to leaders, to the public discussion, to the media, to the journals, again, with the best evidence. and showing us how we need to evolve policies according to the evolution of that evidence. And the second one, as you pointed out before, has to do with capacity building, with training, with giving more instruments and more skills to leaders at the, basically, I would say at the government institutions in both formulating those policies and following with the implementation of those policies. I would say that if the university maintains the knowledge and the training core aspects of their essence with a lot of practical connections at the local context where they are, they will keep on making a huge difference in our capacity to achieve these development goals that we all want for our communities.
Well, Dr. Juan Pablo Uribe, that is a wonderful message for all of our members and non-members around the world interested in global health. We admire greatly the work that you and your colleagues are doing at the bank, trying to improve health outcomes for people around the world and address the social determinants of health. Are there any last words that you want to give to the audience? We invite them to come to our conference, which will take place in March 7th to 10th in Los Angeles. But your colleagues have spoken at our conferences in the past, which we're incredibly grateful for. Is there anything that you'd like to share with our audience? Any other final messages?
Okay, if I again would want to close by appreciating the work that you lead and that the consortium does. Always keep in mind that health and healthcare are local, but public health is national, regional, and global. And we need to work on both sides. And we all need to come together around these challenges, not thinking that one single solution or one single institution will resolve these things, but sharing and adding our best efforts around them in a sustainable way. There are no shortcuts here, by the way. We've learned that. So we need to insist. I really believe that universities that sign in for global health challenges have a very special spirit in themselves. And I want to maintain proximity with them and hopefully one day accompany you in Los Angeles in that wonderful meeting. So thanks so much.
Well, Dr. Juan Pablo Uribe, Global Director for Health, Nutrition, and Population at the World Bank. Juan Pablo, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. Your information you shared will be incredibly valuable and of great interest to individuals around the world. We wish you and your team much success and strength as you continue to work tirelessly to improve health outcomes for people around the world, particularly for those who are least privileged in our world. So go well, and thank you so much for your time.
Keith, thanks so much, and count on us at the World Bank as a strong partner. Take care.
Muchas gracias. Thank you.
Un abrazo. Saludos y gracias.